Board games. We'll be talking about board games and puzzles, but we're not gonna shout. We will today will be talking about going and brute forcing your way to make sure that there are a at least one solution for every puzzle that gives you a star. If the puzzle were to give you stars, I mean, some games give you stars, but some are about pushing around cars. Puzzles and brute forcing to check for solutions is what we're talking about. Puzzle games and brute forcing to check there's at least one solution and maybe just exactly one solution for each puzzle. I'm not gonna shout. Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. It's 10 a.m. UK time. Time for Busy Beats and Board Game Bladder. And today we are talking about how Rob Fisher brute forced things for Qwuzzle and like other even more puzzly games. And yeah, for Qwuzzle, you just had to you didn't even make sure that there's one solution because that's an actual part of the game that you recognize that there isn't a solution. But for your more puzzly games, you had to say, okay, for Genius Gems, like you make sure that there's one solution and ideally just one solution. And yes, let's talk about how that process went. But first of all, hello, Jess. It is lovely to see you. And yes, if you want to call everyone who talks on the stream, then indeed a Bez, then indeed there are two Bezes today. Rob, what is your pronoun?
He and him will suit me fine, thank you.
Jess says, I can tell you wrote that song some time ago and rehearsed it a lot. Sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. But yeah, I'm just joking. I still love you. But thank you for the claps. And hello, J Fool's Guard. It is lovely to see you. So before we go into our regularly scheduled recent highlights, brilliant thing, what would you like to say about the notion of brute forcing? Like last time we talked, we decided that it is ideal if everything has exactly one solution, right? That felt like a vague conclusion, but it isn't essential. Are we agreed on that?
Yeah, I think so. So with Genius Gems, the brief was that there must be at least one solution. Every puzzle that it is possible to create with this game must be solvable. It wasn't stipulated that there should be only one. And indeed, it's apparent that there are many solutions for at least the easiest of the puzzles in the game. Whether any of the puzzles only have one solution is something I've not actually investigated. I think when we spoke last time, I said just how long this brute forcing takes. Now, I'm quite sure that my program is not optimized, and if I had more time and if I had more skill and more knowledge, I'm sure I could whittle the time that it takes to solve down and down and down. Indeed, I could rewrite it in a faster programming language. I could hire a mainframe computer, a supercomputer, and that would run it in seconds, I'm sure. But with my current skill level and on my home PC, it was running for over a day, I think, to prove that all the puzzles were solvable. And so the idea of leaving that going for even longer to check out how many solutions were there for every puzzle, that would take it into the realm of weeks of computer time, and I'm not currently set up to do that.
I mean, Adam mentioned the dissatisfaction with finding a solution and then checking it on the other side of the card or the back of the book and then feeling, oh, well, that's a bit disappointing because it's not quite right. But it's an interesting thing about checking things because I've got IQ rings, I think it's called. And it's very simple. It's if the pieces fit, then that's it. You don't have any rules to the puzzles beyond place the starting blocks. They must go where it says. Anything else can go wherever, and it must fit. There is a little hint that it says, hey, by the way, the solution will always be one interconnected shape, but that's not a rule that you are obliged to follow. That's just a hint to get you along that path so that you can say, well, if this is a separate shape, I do actually need to connect it somehow. And yeah, what do you think about that potential dissatisfaction versus the need for people to even check up the puzzles?
I get round that issue in Genius Gems by not providing a solution. There is no solution to check. You're required to do it yourself. I mean, the game is sold as a 2-player game, although you can play it solo, obviously. And indeed, if you have multiple sets, you can play it as a party game. I've had 6, 8 people all playing it, racing to try and beat each other. But the actual checking of the puzzle is pretty trivial, to be honest. You tend to, it's like marking someone else's homework at school. You glance across at their board and you sort of say, right, where's your straight line? Oh, there it is. Where's your U shape? Right, yep, I can see that, and so on. It's the finding the solution where the real sort of skill lies, not seeing that you've got it. Once you've got it, it's apparent that you've got it.
I think this is really interesting, and a quick hello to Alex, who is also a puzzle designer. It's lovely to have you along. And I think this is a really interesting thing about puzzles, the difficulty of finding the solution versus the difficulty of knowing that you have a solution. Because I find that in puzzle games, when it's easy to check, that makes the puzzle game more satisfying. And I'd be interested to hear if everyone else feels the same way. Because with word search, as long as they vaguely fit the clues, I mean, it doesn't really matter if one thing feels, oh, that's a bit of a tenuous link, but it still fits within the big grid of everything, then that suggests to me, at least, that I got the crossword correct. I say this as someone who's literally never ever managed to do a crossword, but you get my point, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's something deeply unsatisfying about a puzzle where you've got the grid filled and you're staring at it going, is that right? Did I do it? I don't know. And where you actually have to check with an official answer to know that you did it right. It should be apparent when you've succeeded. And I think the most elegant puzzles, it's glaringly obvious. We talked about The Witness, the video game last time.
By Jonathan Blow, yes.
Jonathan Blow, where you're drawing a line from a start to a finish. Well, if you've reached the finish, you've done it. It can't be more straightforward than that. And then if you tie that into all the wonderful things that video games can do with little sound effects and satisfying little animations, a little glow, a little effect when you get to the finish, it really cements that feeling of, yes, I've done it. Now, we can't quite do that in board games or tabletop puzzles. We can't give that quite that level of feedback. But yeah, that's what we're aiming for, is that it should be very obvious that when you've succeeded. So
absolutely, 100%. And again, quick hello to Nicholas and Josie. It's lovely to see you. I say see you, even though the only bits of you that I get to see is this very small icon that you've pre-done, but it's still lovely to have you here. I think this is, 100%. I'm thinking of Asteroid Escape. Do you know this one? I think it's also by Smarts Games. I think this is a beautiful one. If you like sliding puzzles, you'll enjoy this. The genius thing about it is that there's physical limitations on the asteroids. So the asteroids actually overlap the tile that you're sliding them on. So because they overlap, sometimes there will be a physical asteroid. When I say it's obviously not a giant asteroid, it's like a representation of an asteroid, but it literally protrudes from this two-dimensional sliding block. And so one might block the other, so you can't slide them past a certain way. And so you know exactly whether what you're doing is a legal move or not.
Yep.
And I think that is a magical thing. And I think that is, without that, are we agreed that a puzzle game is incredibly lacking? I'm trying to think of a bad puzzle game, even though I don't want to name names, but I actually can't think of a puzzle game that doesn't apply to off the top of my head. So that suggests that it has to be always, the difficulty of checking has to be almost proportional to the difficulty of solving. If it takes you 1 minute to solve, it should take you like 1 second to check. But if it's a really deep puzzle and it takes you an hour to solve, because there are some puzzles like that, I think it's fine if it takes you literally a minute to check. Are we broadly agreed?
Yeah, I agree that the effort on both sides of the equation, there's a what's the word I'm looking for? A sort of parallel, as you say. The harder the puzzle, it's more reasonable that it should take a little bit of time to check. I can't name a puzzle off the top of my head which doesn't have that, but in the back of my mind, I remember a point and click adventure game of some sort from probably the 90s or early 2000s, where I spent half an hour solving this convoluted machine of gears and things, and got no feedback that I'd succeeded, even though I had. In fact, I'd probably succeeded many times.
So you succeeded accidentally without even realizing it?
Well, I'd succeeded through logic, but what I was expecting was, once the machine was in the correct configuration, something would happen. The thing that happened was something along the lines of, the door was now unlocked, but the door didn't swing open with a great fanfare. It required me to walk away from that contraption and open the door by hand.
And this was in an escape room?
This was in a point and click adventure, so a precursor to escape.
Yeah, I mean, really, that's even less of an excuse. I was going to say in an escape room, at least, I would say, well, it's a bit tricky to get, a mechanism to make the thing swing open. But yeah, I could sort of forgive them. But, in a point and click adventure, that's no excuse. I mean, I think that you want guidance, you want little rewards along the way. And we've got a really interesting thing that Alex has mentioned in the chat, where anyone who's familiar with Forbidden Sky, yes, it does happen there, where there's a little junior puzzle game where you're putting puzzle pieces together, and when it's completely correct, it completes a circuit, and it all lights up, and some music plays. That's fantastic. And so the person doesn't even need to do a visual check. They know that it's correct. Is that not fantastic?
That's wonderful, and exactly the kind of thing that should be implemented in a children's toy, bring a bit of life, a bit of color to it. Of course, it becomes harder and harder to do that as the complexity of the puzzle ramps up, particularly if it's a puzzle with multiple solutions, because you're now, I mean, if you think of the complexity of what I had to write to check for solutions, you can't possibly build that into a little circuit in a toy.
Sure, it's going to work for something that's far simpler. Maybe the circuit is actually the puzzle. So if the circuit, you're connecting actual lines and then you're putting them into a certain place, then that actually becomes
total sense,
But yes, I believe that some sort of bringing in the electronics for audio-visual feedback, especially right at the end, once you've managed to complete it, I think that's really interesting. And Alex says, when I'm making a paper puzzle, it's nice to make the solution a known word. So rather than having something where you're like, oh, is this correct? Having it so that it's a word that people will recognize, it helps confirm it's the correct answer, especially if it's thematic to the puzzle. I feel like we've been on topic for too long. Let's head off, unless you've got anything you want to say right now.
No, take me on a detour.
Recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights. Recent highlights, playing games and other delights. Recent highlights. So what have been some of other people's recent highlights? I am interested to know. First, I will say that my recent highlights yesterday, after my stream, I had I'm just going to include events into this. I had a mediocre pizza. It was a bit disappointing. I've learned to, I don't know what went wrong with it. It just didn't feel steamy hot, and it cooled down not awfully quickly. And I might have afterwards, when I came back to quell my disappointment, have eaten a bit too much that night. But anyway, I went off. I cycled away about 2 hour round trip, which is a fair bit, and then I went and I saw Daksha, who might be helping me for Aircon. Taught her about 8 different games, 3, 4 of which I expect them to actually learn and be able to demonstrate for Aircon, and the others just to, yeah, like, no, I think it was more than that. I think it was about 10 games that I taught. But the 6 LDEC games that I taught, I only expect them to remember one of them. Wibble, but it was a nice day of being out. I came back and I recorded with the lovely Who What Why podcast, which is Michael Bonnet. And they're always a joy to talk to, and that's going to be popping up during my Kickstarter, which is launching in 21 days. And I should actually probably put a little link to my next Kickstarter so that people can click to follow it. So yes, please follow my Kickstarter. And that is everything from me. How about you, Rob?
My life continues to be dominated by our new dog, who requires a huge amount of love and attention. She's come to us from the street, so she knew nothing about 4 weeks ago. She could just about manage a sit. So we're working lots on recall behavior and staying and not eating things that she shouldn't eat. So we had a major milestone yesterday. I took her up to the common on one lead. First time she's been that far from home on a single lead. It's always been 2 up until now, just in case she chews through the first one, which she has done on more than one occasion. She's called Plien, to answer Jess's question in the chat. Plien means feather in Welsh, and she is a very fluffy, whitey cream dog, so she's quite feather-like.
Aww.
And yesterday she met her first UK dog. And they did the things dog do,
Wow.
where they smell the rear ends and they walk in little circles, and then one does a little wee and the other one does a little wee, and it was all very polite. And yes, a perfect introduction. So most exciting.
Wonderful. That sounds super cute. Apparently, Jess's internet sometimes gets overwhelmed by me because I'm too awesome. That's nice to hear. J Guard says, I'd love to go to Aircon, maybe next year. Yes, that's the thing. I mean, as we are still within a pandemic, unfortunately. It is looking like it's becoming endemic. There is no hope at this point of it becoming eradicated, which is incredibly sad. But it is going to become safer as time goes on, I believe. And so it will be here next year for you. And yes, it will be lovely to see you, J Guard, whenever you can make it. Alex says, it was my birthday, so I got some nice gifts, went for a windy walk, and ate chips. Fantastic. And yeah, hope you have a great year ahead. And Alex says, that's how I greet someone, with running round in circles, sniffing away and doing a little wee.
Yes.
But let's talk about brilliant things. What's a little thing which is brilliant? Why is brute forcing a brilliant thing? Why is brute forcing something that you'd want to do? I mean, it sounds quite aggressive. Is it? Explain what it is. I mean, for those who aren't familiar with programming, and maybe explain why you chose to do it and why it is a brilliant thing.
So brute forcing a problem is throwing might at it rather than brains, essentially. That's not to say there's no brains, no intellect going in, but it's useful for problems where you can't solve them purely logically or mathematically, let's say in the puzzle world. The term probably comes from sort of breaking an entry, that kind of thing, that yes, you can spend years learning to pick locks, and you can hone your skill, and you can arrive on site with the tools, and you can get your little levers and rakes in there and pick your lock in, or you can just keep hitting the door till it falls down, and both will get you into the building, if that's your ultimate
you
goal.
can't just keep hitting the door with a low force. You need to hit it with enough force.
Yes. Well, I don't know. That's a physics question. I suppose there is a minimum
I mean,
force.
if I just
Yes.
did that to the wall
Oh,
for like, it would take eons and probably would,
it would. Would your finger wear out before the wall? Probably,
yeah.
yes. Yes. So it has to be a sufficiently powerful thump to get through the door. And similarly, when you're brute forcing a puzzle, you have to be coming up with things that are at least reasonable stabs at a solution. I mean, you could just generate random rubbish and hope that eventually some of that random rubbish is a perfect solution. In the same way that you could put random words together and hope that it turns into Shakespeare. And yeah, but I think people have proved that that's unlikely to happen in the known lifespan of the universe to date. So it's not the best way. But so brute forcing in programming means you chip away at the solution by trying things, and every time your solution fails, you take a step back, you change something, you try again, you check, have I achieved it yet? I was going to
So you need some intellect to make sure that you're checking all the solutions, but it's kind of like you're putting the energy away from the human because it's a relatively easy to code something that says just try all the solutions rather
yeah.
than making any decisions about what to try and then letting the computer spend more effort than the human, relatively
Yeah,
speaking.
you're asking the computer to make legitimate moves. You're not asking them to break the rules of your puzzle or your game, but it's not doing so with any end goal in mind. It's not thinking, well, I'm going to start with this piece because uh, I've got a good feeling about that, or I won the
Mm-mm-mm.
game with that one last time, or it's the most powerful piece. You're just saying start with a piece and then follow it up and keep going until you reach whatever the end of the game is, and then look and see how you did, essentially. So with a puzzle that involves filling a grid, essentially that means put stuff into the grid until the grid is full, and then see if you solved the puzzle. And if you didn't, take some of the stuff out of the grid, put it back in a different combination, and see did you complete the puzzle, and keep doing it. And you might get lucky with your random assortment of tiles into the grid. You might solve it on turn one. But more likely, you're going to have to do hundreds, if not thousands, of iterations before you actually come up with the solution. But that's all I'm interested in, is that
Mm-mm.
there is a solution, and as soon as I hit that one, I save it
And
into a
because there's
spreadsheet.
a relatively so I guess what's brilliant about brute forcing is it's easy for a decoder, relatively speaking. You still have to know how to code. You still have to know how to keep track along the tree so you're going back and forth, so you're never revisiting old
Yeah,
solutions. But fundamentally, it's easier for the programmer when there's few enough possibilities. I mean, obviously, Go cannot be brute
mm,
forced, but chess is a game that essentially that's how it was beaten. I
yes.
mean, how humans were beaten by brute forcing because there are few enough possibilities in that game.
Mm.
And I
With
think that's
something
what it
like,
comes down to. And also a quick hello to Matthew Dunstan. And
oh,
I'm interested to know for you and any other designers, is this something that you've ever used within your own designs? And yeah, I don't know if can't think of anything that Matt's done which would merit some sort of solution like this because it feels like does this doesn't really have any application outside of the field of games where there is one clear solution and then finding that solution is the thing? Or do you think that people should be using this sort of AI check in Euro games or typical card games, if you know what I mean?
I don't know that people should be using it for Euro games or card games, but I was just thinking about what you were saying with chess. And in chess, of course, the most sophisticated machines can probably now take a game of chess right the way through to the end, right the way through to checkmate. But your little chess computers of the 80s and 90s, early 2000s certainly couldn't do that. Even the best computer programs at that stage couldn't do that. And so what they were doing, as far as I understand, was they would be playing a certain number of turns ahead. And
Mm-mm-mm.
for an amateur chess player, if the computer was playing 3 or 4 turns ahead of you and picking the most advantageous move for the next 3 or 4 moves,
Mm-mm-mm.
that was enough to
As
make
I
it
understand it,
competitive.
it would, like for Deep Blue, I can't remember how many, but it would basically look X moves ahead and basically just look at the material,
Mm.
give each piece a certain number to say, okay, this is the power on this side, this is the
Yeah,
power on this side, this is the relative power, and the way it would change after so many moves. And that's how it worked,
yeah.
broadly speaking. Whereas,
And I
yeah,
can certainly imagine someone, you could make a system that did that for a Euro game, so long as you decide what metrics you want to pursue. So you could say, try all the moves that you can do with the cards in your hand, and see in 2 or 3 turns' time which of those leaves you with the most money, or which of those leaves you with the most victory points, or some combination of that. You could say, I'd rather have victory points, but I'll settle for money. And it would be perfectly possible to write a system to do that. Would you learn much from it? Don't know. Would it be
I mean, I
a
guess you
good use of
could,
your
in
time?
theory, use something to check the maximum possible score in a
Mhm.
roll and writes or something. If you
Yeah.
were like, that might be vaguely in, like, would players even want to know that? It doesn't feel like they do. Would.
Mm.
Like, I was listening to Jeff Engelstein talk about Super Skill Pinball. Do you know this game?
Mm.
And
Yep.
so in Super Skill Pinball, it's a roll and write where you're drawing on this laminated board and then you play 3 times and then you add up your scores typically. And when it's a multiplayer game, everyone plays, everyone competes, and it's the highest score that wins, obviously. But when it's a one-player game, there's nothing in there that says this score is good, or this score is a winning score, or this is a score to beat, or there's no ranking. There's one score that you get in the rule sheet that's a super low score, so you'll almost always beat
Mm.
it on your first ever game. And then it becomes just like regular pinball. Now, if they were to say this is the absolute maximum, then I
Mm.
think that would actually take away from the game. I think there's something a lot more interesting about me saying,
Mm.
hey, I got 120 points in Welcome to Dino World. I just played it the first time after publication last weekend, and that was a pretty good score. The average score of everyone else was about 85. So, it was a big jump, but I kind of worked on that game, so I should know
Mm.
it pretty well. Now, is this the best possible score? Definitely not. What would be the best possible score given the visitor cards that I had, given those things, given the rolls that I made? I don't know. I'm sure it would be like at least 130, I'm guessing. Would it be even? I don't know. Would that give me any more joy to know that the maximum possible score in that situation would be, say, 142 points and I was 22 away? No, that wouldn't. No, I don't think it would, because I think that it builds a community to say, hey, what was your score? What was your score? And what's going on? Um, I want to check out some of the comments. So, firstly, hello, Hal. It's lovely to see you. We've had some brilliant things. I do want to give a quick shout out to Nicholas, just resorting things, Josie getting the nails done. And I think it's lovely that people are still having these joys. Um, Matthew cheekily says, I have had some prototypes I needed to brute force, but I never got them to work.
Mm.
Alex says, I once made an AI player from Flamme Rouge in Excel, trying to give it an algorithm based on what I understood as the important things to consider as the game progresses. Matthew Dunstan talks about trying to adapt the Ace of Aces system for narrative games. J. Fool's Guard has used brute forcing to get an idea of the hit chance in a dice system. And Hal basically used brute forcing, like a backtracking algorithm, to generate valid puzzles. To make sure that, because encrypted, you want to make sure that no matter how things combine. Again, this is a puzzle game where it's interesting, these kind of deductive puzzles, because once one person's completed it and then they need to check it, it's not like they have to. I feel like they have to kind of announce it, so sometimes it does take away from everyone else's joy a little bit, but it also keeps them wanting to play a second or third time, right? But do you get what I mean about this slight it's just a random tangential thought. If we could bring a little bit more of the, oh, everyone gets a guess at this point, so maybe they guessed first, and then you carry on playing for like one more round or something, but you don't hear their guess, they have to write it. And yeah, Alex, I think, is talking about Deep Blue had 200 million positions per second. That's quite a lot of computational power. That's very fast.
Quite impressive. I don't think I was getting very close to that with my brute forcing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to the quality of the code, whether you code in like at a low-level language. I mean, back then they might have even had to like do something that's completely unreadable to humans. Well, to the average human, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got a few things to show. Would you like to?
Yeah, I was going to sort
bring
of
that up?
walk through the process. This is just my graphics program. I'm not super organized with slides or anything. We're just going to have a go at winging our way through some stuff. So to start with, I was going to consider a puzzle, a very simple puzzle. So we've got a 3x3 grid here, and the aim of this puzzle would be to fill it with words, 3-letter words. Let's see if I can.
Art.
Yes, let's see if I can grab a
but all of them are unique, right?
Yes, we probably ought to stipulate that. So what shall we do? Let's see if I can. Oh, I've got a interesting looking paintbrush. Let's grab something very basic like that. Right, so we're going to shove the word rat in across the top, and I'm thinking as I do this about how am I solving this puzzle. Red, I can shove in down there. And then my brain goes right across the middle. Oh, I wonder, I could put the word eat in there. Oh, but that's gonna, I mean, it fits, but I've set myself up horribly here. I've now got a 3-letter word that starts with a double A and another 3-letter word that starts with a double T. So that doesn't seem like a very good word to put in there. So I would get rid of that. And I've not thought about this in advance. So I may have
Alex
set myself
says, one
up
of my favorite words. But you don't have anything for the TT, do you?
No.
I don't think that's
you
could do air, ERR.
I've chosen a particularly bad set of starting words, I think. But my point is, you can see that there's an approach to filling this grid. Now, this would be a really nice little programming challenge. How do we brute force this? How do we get a computer to generate?
I feel like people want to do this.
They want to solve it for me. What's maybe rat was a bad choice to start with. I don't know. Let's try. How about rum down here? And then I can do use across the middle, and then I can do 10 down there, and I can do man across the bottom, but Acer isn't a word as far as I'm aware. So again, I've failed. But the point is, how would we go about getting a computer to solve this? And the first part of the problem is defining what is the solution we're looking for, and how will we know when we've got there? So we need to start coming up with some rules. So a valid solution is when the grid is full. Well, that's easy enough to check for. We're just looking for a letter in each box. But more than that, a valid solution requires that we've got a valid word in each row and each column. So we need some kind of dictionary that'll tell us what words are valid. And that's very handily. We have these things called dictionaries that these days are publicly accessible on the web, or you can download a text file. So that part's no problem, really. So it's a very trivial puzzle to check that we've got a valid solution. So then how do we actually go about asking the computer to solve it? And a lot of that is to do with making sure that our terminology is accurate. It's impossible to get a computer to do something unless you're asking it very accurately. And for a puzzle like this, it's very simple. We already have rows, words. I've already used some of them. So we have rows, and we have 3 of them, and we can number them 1, 2, and 3, and so on. And we've got columns, and we can number those 1, 2, and 3 because computers like numbering things. And so what we would do is we would write a program that goes through a process. Let's erase these, just quickly scribble this out. So the process would be, I pass the program this empty grid. And the very first thing that the program says is the grid full? If the grid is full, then we need to check whether we have a valid solution. But in this case, the grid is not full. So I then say, well, I'd like you to go to the first row where there is no word, and that happens to be row number 1 at the moment. And I then ask you to select a word, and there's no limitations on this. So it selects the word tin, and it inserts it in there. And the way I did my brute forcing was to use a system called recursion. You talked earlier about traversing a tree. So with traversing a tree, what you would do is you would get every possible combination of letters that could fill this grid, and you would then move through that essentially for valid answers. My way of doing it using recursion, which is another very common computing technique, is slightly different in that, and let's see if I can remember how to get my software to do this. Having put my first word in, I now essentially create a copy of my puzzle. There we go, hooray, I did it. And I now pass this copy of the grid back into the program. And it asks the same question. Is the grid full? No, it's not. There's still some empty rows and columns in there. Okay, then repeat the same procedure. I'd like you to take me to the first row that doesn't have a word in it, and put a word in there. And it chooses the word, I don't know, eon. Why am I choosing words that end up with double letters there? And that's fine. And at that point, the program creates a copy of itself, or the data, a copy of the data rather, the state of the program at this moment in time. And it moves that across. Oops, I've lost my tin somewhere. What have I done here? Let's see if I can persuade it to. Yes, right. So, and we ask the same question, is the grid full? No, it's not. Then take me to the first empty space and fill it in with something. And it puts in the word jam, because who doesn't like jam? There we are. And we pass that back into the program for a final time. Is the grid full? Yes, it is. Right. So now we need to do the check. We know the rows are valid in this example of the way of solving it because we chose valid words. So we now just need to choose, look at the columns, and we look at column 1, and is Tej a word? No, it's not. And so we fall at the first hurdle. And as soon as you get a fail state in recursion, it basically says, well, that branch, that solution didn't work. So let's delete it. Let's go back a step. And it jumps you back, and you don't have the magic of recursion is that just by failing, you get back to the previous step of trying to solve the puzzle. So I can now put in my next word from my dictionary.
It's like if all the possibilities of the infinite universes were a series of ever forking roads, and then you just go back as soon as you get into trouble, go back a wee bit. And presumably there's got to be a system to this. So if you were to do this in real life, then you'd be doing all the 3-letter words alphabetically, because that would probably make the most sense to make sure that
Not
You
necessarily, because if you're only looking for one solution, it really doesn't matter where you start. It doesn't matter
But you
if I'm
want to
using
make
the
sure
same
that you
word.
don't go back to the same thing. So you have to have them in some sort of order,
Yeah.
right?
So the way that's handled in my program, or theoretically could be handled in this program, is that you start the program, you start the brute forcing with a full dictionary, if you like. But when I
Mm,
insert the word tin now exists in the grid and no longer exists in the dictionary. Um,
mm.
so
But tin could have worked for row 3.
mhm. It could, but because we put the stipulation in that we're not using the same word more than
But
once, as soon as I've included it, I don't ever want it to be in that pool of
But when
available
you go
words again.
back, if
Yeah.
you delete 10 from the top row, you want it to be deleted
Mhm.
as a possibility for the top row, but you want it to still be present for row 2 and 3. So in that scenario, would you be likely to do 3 different word lists?
Well, that's sort of the magic of recursion, that when we rule out tin as a word for row 1, that means essentially we're jumping back in time to a point before we'd ever inserted tin in row 1. Therefore, tin still exists in the dictionary. Therefore, it's still a word that could be chosen in row 2 or 3. So we get the behavior that you're describing for free, essentially. And this is a brilliant thing about recursion, but it's also what makes it mind-bogglingly, mind-meltingly difficult to get your head around. And um, it took me many attempts to get it right in my solver, because you think you understand what it's going. It's a little bit like a sort of black box. There feels like there's some magic going on there. It's not. There's no magic. There's nothing that can't be explained. And of course, you can always drill down and look at the data and see exactly what's going on. But it feels a little bit magic, because it is a bit like walking a timeline, that you explore possible futures, and when you discover they're not the future you want, you jump back in time, and you don't have to manually put things back into dictionaries, or say, I'd like you to reconsider that. That becomes a possibility again just by the fact that you jump back in time. I don't know if that makes sense.
I
It's
mean, I understand it, but it becomes a possibility. But how do you
Mhm,
to stop it being you want to never go down the possibility of tin in row 1.
mhm,
Once you've kind of gone back and forth and said, okay, all the possible things we've changed, we go back, we try all the different. So in this situation, we'd go tin and then eon. Let's say they're the first 2 words in the dictionary
mhm.
because it's arranged randomly. And
Yeah,
then we go none, and then none doesn't work. Then we go back, we try word number 1, 2, 4 in the
yeah.
dictionary, and then we try number 5 in row 3, and then go through like all, I don't know how many words, like let's
Uh,
say there's 20,000 3-letter words. I don't know. Uh,
I was going to say, let's keep it very simple. It's a very small dictionary of 5 words. So we get to word number 5, and none of them have worked.
but
So at that point, we have to backtrack,
mm,
and we go back to a point in time where um, when none of my 5 words work in row 3, what we're basically saying is that the current combination of row 1 and 2 doesn't lead to a solution in row 3. So we now
I
need to
feel
go
like
back
this is
to.
actually a very interesting puzzle. Like if you limit the number of words, and
Mhm.
then that is actually interesting because in the comments, Alex was saying, "Is this the birth of the next L deck game?" And actually, the first time I ever got the L deck, the first ever game that I physically played with not the prototype but the printed cards was a game about 3-letter words. I just kind of started putting them out, and within a couple of days, I'd invented this game where you're trying to place all your cards. You're trying to get, 5 on each of the 9 spaces, and each time you put down a word, it has to make a word going left or up top to bottom, and you get 3 chances for cards that you don't have to use. But yeah, that was like obviously the L deck is its own thing. There's 2 letters on each card, but having giving people a very small number of words and saying, okay, how do you fit that in? I mean, has that been done as a small children's puzzle game? So I think if not, we should do that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, yeah. It sounds like a game. Let's try
Yeah.
it.
Anyway, firstly, Alex has, of course, found the solution as a human.
Oh, good.
Congratulations.
Excellent.
Tin Ace gets, I thought you might.
Tin, ace, and get.
So that would be tag, ice, and net on the columns.
There we are. Yes. Perfect. Award yourself an internet star immediately.
Congratulations.
There we are. Very good.
And according to Scrabble, there are only 1,065 three-letter words. That's fewer than I thought there would be.
Yeah.
But Alex also asks, would it be worth checking the second letter of the columns as part of valid words before filling the third row?
So this is where the thought process goes next. That on this small trivial game, it's not going to take a computer long to solve this with only 1,000 odd three-letter words in the English language. But we can already see optimizations. So as soon as we put this second letter in, we've got an NN appearing in this third column. It would be potentially sensible to check whether any three-letter words begin with NN, because we can fail early. You always want to, in brute forcing, you want to fail as early as you possibly can when you know there's no solution. So this is a great example of don't bother filling in row 3 because you're not ever going to succeed. And part of the skill of coming up with a good brute forcing algorithm is working out how many different ways you can fail early. In this little three-letter word game, there aren't that many in actual fact. It really comes down to, do the first 2 letters lead to any words? If not, give up. But if we think about Genius Gems, if I scroll over here, so Genius Gems, in fact, I'm going to change to a different tab. Where are we? There we are. So for anyone who doesn't know, so this was, I should have looked at this. Right, this is the shell sheet for Genius Gems that I put together that gives you an idea of the puzzle. So we have a number of dice. They come in 3 different difficulties. You select some combination of those. So you start out with 5 basic dice would be the recommendation. You roll those, and at the time of this cell sheet, there was you placed them onto this component that then told you which color each pattern was to be made from. In the finished product, if I hold it up to the camera, I can show you, or I probably need to be able to see my own camera to do this. Let's put it to one side. Where's my camera gone? There we are. So hopefully, right, you can see that we have a little widgety thing. This is a little box, Tupperware. Essentially, it has a lid, so we can turn it upside down. It's a dice shaker. Once we've got it back up the right way, we jiggle it around until the dice settle. I take the lid off, and there's my puzzle. The dice have fallen into little wells, each one of which is surrounded by a color. And that tells me that in this example, for example, I'm looking to make a row of 3 using the pink gems, and a diamond of 4 using the blue gems. So that's stage 2 of setting the puzzle. If we jump back to my cell sheet, step 3 is that you fill in the grid. And the grid is filled in using these tiles. Each tile is made of 3 hexagons, and they're double-sided, so that this tile here that has 2 blue gems and a purple, when I flip that to the reverse side, that will become 2 purples and a blue. So this is what makes the puzzle interesting, sort of texturally, if you like, with your fingers, the dexterity of solving it, that each tile has 3 rotations and 2 sides, giving a total of 6 ways in which that tile can be placed. And then with 10 possible slots on the board, if we look at the board here, you'll see these large slots that these fit into. That's where we get our 60 million possible permutations of the tiles into the board. And that's the game. We're racing now to try and create these patterns. In this cell sheet example, you can see that we've got the pink diamond has already been formed. You've got the little curl of 3 blues up top. We've got the purple, and so on. And the first person to complete all that wins the game, wins that round, and then you roll your dice again, possibly increasing the difficulty level, and you go again.
And because these shapes can be done in any color, there's no, they have to be done in the correct
They have to
color.
be done in the correct color. Yes. So this diamond here has to be done in pink. You can accidentally make it out of purple, but it doesn't count for anything.
Okay.
So how do we then go about brute forcing this? Well, it's in some ways similar, more similar to the letters puzzle than you might think. So the first thing to point out is that we have this what I would call a hexagonal grid. It's a sparse hexagonal grid because it's missing some sections. But the wonderful thing about hexagons is that you can pretend that they're squares. I grab my paint
offset
again.
slightly from each other. Yes.
So we have rows just like we had before. Are you gonna draw? You're not gonna draw. Why do you not want to draw a pen? No, pen has given up drawing for some reason.
And that's actually a really interesting design tactic. That's if you are trying to make a hexagonal grid, hexagons are really hard to draw. If you've just got cards that are square or rectangular, just offset every row by half a unit, where 1 unit is the width of a square or a card.
Yeah, so we have, there we go. Let's see if I can make this a little more visible. But yeah, this is all I'm trying to demonstrate, is that we once again have rows like this going down. We have 7 of them. And then, albeit at an angle, we have, I'm going to draw this one here. Let's see if I can get this right. There we are. Let's make that a different color. Oops. There we are. So yeah, we have some rows, columns rather, that we can think about going this way. Oops, I've drawn that wrong. It's not at the right angle. There we are. Should be like that. And again, we have 7.
People can see what's going on, I think.
See what's going on. And so that gives us our coordinate system. Again, each one of these cells can be given a number. So this is row 1 and that's column 2. So for some reason I numbered these columns first. So I would call that square cell 21, and that would be 31, 41. Down at the bottom we've got cell 77. And so that's how I defined my grid, was just by making a list of all the valid cell numbers. So the second part of how do we solve this, get rid of those, is if I'm looking for a certain pattern. So I'm looking for let's say a row of 3 reds here. How do I encode that into a language that the computer will understand? Well, the way I did it was to look at this first hexagon here and essentially work out where are these other hexagons relative to it. So this one is 1 row further down. Well, my rows are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is +1 on the rows. If this is cell, where are we? Let me look at my cheat sheet. So we're starting in cell 42. This one
because
here.
Because that's column 4 and row 2.
3. Then that is 44, and this is 45. So the pattern of 3 in a row in this particular way is 0 +1 +2. If we look at it running across the board, then the pattern here is 0 +10 +20, because our tens column is increasing. And this means that
the other direction is going to be trickier though.
This third direction down here. So we're increasing in the tens and in the units. So this is +11 and +22. And the next thing you realize as a little time saver is that
Huh.
those, in this particular example, those are the only three directions we need to test. Because if you imagine, you think, well, what about if the pattern was going this way? We will already have checked that, because a pattern going right from this space is exactly the same as the pattern going left from this space. And if we move across the grid from this top corner, cell 1, and head the way down to cell 7, down at the bottom, we only ever need to check in a forwards direction. There's no point in checking backwards because it will already have been covered. Now, the straight line of 3 has only 3 possible orientations, those 3 that I've just shown. But some of the more complicated patterns, when we start getting little sort of S-bend, S-shapes like this, those not only have rotations, but they also have mirror images. So you sometimes get 6, or I think some of the patterns get even more. So there's more to check. But that's this part of the process is critical to writing a brute forcing algorithm, is that you've got to sort of set up
Be
the
able to check
language.
if it's correct or not.
Yes, and you've got to come up with a system. I mean, there are probably other ways I could have laid out this grid, but laying it out as a linear array, just a string of numbers essentially, of these are valid cells, and then encoding the patterns as, again, a linear array of this is a pattern, and it has these offsets, 1, 11, 22, and 33, or whatever it happens to be. And then that gives you the framework on which to build this brute forcing program. And it took me a lot of attempts to come up with all the right terminology, just insofar as naming variables and things like that. So if this is a cell, then a collection of 3 is a tricell in my language. These are the variable names I was using in the program. And then if this is a hex, then the tile, the complete tile, is a trihex, because it's 3 hexagons combined. So trihexes fit into tricells, and this collection of tricells, 10 tricells, is my grid. And you have to be so strict about naming everything in meaningful ways that makes sense, because otherwise, particularly when you start introducing something mildly complex like recursion, you get lost so quickly.
And so when you're coding, you need to make sure that your functions have meaningful names and
Yes.
you comment your code. We've got a tangential question about the design of the game, which is, are the tiles symmetrical in terms of color balance?
Yes. So it's a perfect set of tiles. We have 5.
Bring that
Yes, let me
collection up
find
again.
that collection again. Where is it? There we are. So yeah, this is all the tiles, but showing both sides. So you can see this bottom right here is the purple and blue, 2 purples, 1 blue. And up here we've got the 2 blues, 1 purple. So those 2 are actually the front and back of the same tile. And that gives, with 5 colors, that gives you 10 tiles, and every color is represented on exactly 4 of those tiles. And that gives us, interestingly, another one of the quick fail states of my brute force. That if the way I solve the puzzle is not by fitting these tiles in. The way I solve the puzzle is the first thing my program does is it looks at each of the shapes. We haven't looked at those. Here's a screen with all the shapes that are in the game. And again, very important that these have meaningful names, just for keeping track of what the hell's going on. So we have lines which are always straight. So we have a line 3 and we have line 4. We have wiggles that have kinks in them. So wiggle 3, we have wiggle 4 here, which has a kink. We have dashes where there's an empty space or some other color, some other pattern in the middle. And then we have shears and so on. But a meaningful naming convention. So the first thing
it only had to make sense to you fundamentally,
absolutely,
as you programmed it.
Yeah, but without those, it's just impossible to keep track of what's going on. And and coming up with the right names that I found made me want to use them, essentially, rather than varying the terminology. So it became useful, for example, even though this is a diamond, I can see it's a diamond, making sure everything finished with a number that told me how many hexes made it was useful. Or in the terms of the area puzzles, how many sections that area had to be. So the way my brute forcer works is for each pattern, say line 3, it looks at the grid using those offsets that I was previously talking about, and it works out every possible position that a line of 3 can fit, and it saves that. And I think the line 3 is the easiest one to fit. I think there's about 86 places it can fit on the grid. And once it's done that for every shape, it can't do that for the area puzzles. We have to come back and talk about those later. Once it's done that for every shape, it then ranks those shapes, because I had a theory that the fewer the positions that you can put a shape in. So I think this V5, for example, has relatively few positions it can go on the board, maybe 10. The fewer the places it can go, the harder it is to place with other puzzles and with other patterns, and therefore it should be placed first. There's no point in filling up the grid with line 3s that can frankly go just about anywhere, only to find that you've blocked all the spaces that V5 can go. So having ranked the patterns by number of places they can go, choose for any given challenge. I think challenge was the term I'm using for a set of 5 patterns that I'm trying to solve.
And to use challenge rather than puzzle to distinguish it from, to suggest that it has more than one solution. Why are you using that word rather than puzzle?
It was just I think I found that I ended up using puzzle to mean more than one thing. So I thought that challenge as a collection of 5 patterns made more sense to me. It just helped me distinguish terms, and this is purely my own private vocabulary. It's not something that I would put in the rules or would necessarily tell the publisher you must use this word or whatever.
It's not something that you would even suggest other designers use.
No, it's purely find the word that works for you. That means you always use it in the correct way. Essentially, that's the goal.
And that's the thing. I think it's like, designing in general, everyone does it in different ways. And everyone has different things that work for them. And I think it's so easy when you read one of these books to say, hey, this is how you do crowdfunding, or this is how you make a game, to believe that this is the one and only way. But that's not the case at all. And in the same way, all of this vocabulary and all of this approach is just one of the ways that you can approach these things.
Yeah. So having determined which of the individual patterns needs to be fitted first, we've got our short list of the 6 positions on the board that V5 can fit. Place it into one of those positions, and now pass that board state back into the brute force algorithm. It says, is the board full? No, it's not. There are still 4 patterns that have not been placed on it. So take the next most difficult one, which in my example, let's say it's a -5. There's only 20 places that can go. I'm making these numbers up, but you get the point. So then place -5 into an available position, and keep doing this until you either can't place a pattern, in which case we failed, or you have placed all 5 patterns. If you've placed all 5 patterns, we now need to fill in the rest of the grid. And this is where we get to another fail state. You will remember that I said each color appears on 4 different tiles precisely. Well, as you fill in the rest of the grid, you might find that a particular space needs, it's got to have yellow in it, and it's got to have blue in it in order to meet the needs. But so does this other space, also needs blue and yellow. Well, blue and yellow only appears on 1 tile, so that's an impossibility. Blue and yellow as a pair, a color pairing, cannot appear in 2 different tricells. So as soon as you find that you're assigning the same color pair to a second tricell, that's a fail state. You can abort immediately. And I think there was one other fail state off the top of my head. I can't remember what that was. But there's certainly.
So it's almost like you first look, can this challenge even be solved if you
Mhm.
were filling it in freeform with just coloring in markers?
Yes.
And then you check,
Can it be done with the
can that
tiles?
solution be replicated with the actual tiles that you physically manufactured?
Yes, and the two do sort of overlap because this fail state, I think I do keep track of which color pairs I'm using. So as soon as I need to use a color pair for the second time, I can fail at that point. But yes, I'm solving it with like a coloring in exercise rather than the tiles, because I found that easier to conceive. And I think it's a valid approach. I think it's a fast,
Mm-mm-mm.
valid approach to doing it. The final bit of the brute forcing that we haven't talked about at all yet are
And
this
I find this
final.
really interesting because when you talked about brute forcing, I
Mhm,
did assume that it would just be putting all the tiles out,
mm,
and this it just makes so much more sense.
yeah,
And this, um, yeah, because there's going to be so many possibilities of placing tiles. I don't know how many million or billion
it's
or
it's it's 60, 65 million, something like that.
oh, that's fewer than I expected. I
Yeah.
was expecting a lot more zeros than that. I guess yeah, each thing there are only 10
Mhm,
possibilities. Um, but Alex does want to quickly ask, how did the brute
mhm,
forcing impact? Well, maybe we can get into that a wee bit later. We've already talked last time that one of the things on one of the dice was altered because it was
yeah,
initially impossible. And then Rob's second guess at what would be possible was successful. And congratulations. And that was a bit of intuition. That
yeah.
was a bit of understanding the system and the way it works. And what made it impossible, if you know what I mean? Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is. So, in terms of that intuition, having played around with my prototype a lot, I found that, yeah, there were other metrics by which you could measure the complexity of patterns. So, the number of hexes it took to make a pattern. So V5 takes 5 hexes is obviously going to be harder to build than line 3, which only takes 3 hexes.
Mm-mm.
But you can then look at how many tiles does it require to make that pattern. Because one shape that uses 5 hexes might be possible with 3 of the tiles, whereas another shape that uses 5 hexes, because of the positions of those hexes, might actually require that you use all 4 of the tiles showing that color. So that's
Mm.
obviously a much bigger limitation. Um, how much of the board space does it use up? So this one, I'm not sure if you're still looking at my dice or my face, but this pattern C5 takes up a lot of board space. I think that has to sit in a minimum of certainly 3 tri-cells, possibly even 4. And I think the pattern that got rejected was one that always took up 4 of the tri-cells on the board,
Mm-mm-mm.
and it just dominated too much. And as soon as I saw that, it just clicked that in order to, given that I knew that that had failed, albeit only twice out of the 10,000 plus puzzles that are challenges that are in the game, in order to maximize the chance of my next attempt succeeding, I was going to take a step back and reduce the complexity of that pattern from one that took four try cells down to one that only took 3 tri-cells, and that was
So
enough.
Area 4, correct me if I'm
Yes,
wrong, but Area 4 looks like it's going to use all 4. Is that
correct.
correct?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
And Area 1, I'm not sure. Like, it
So,
depends on how the tricells are arranged. I can't work it out in my brain
mhm.
whether that.
Yes, again, so the areas always require that you use all 4 tiles with that color. It just says how many groupings you are allowed to have. So with area 1, every bit of green that you have in your
Oh, it doesn't
solution.
even need to be in that shape.
No, not at all. So the area, there are 2 types of puzzle in the game. There are the patterns, which are the vast majority of them, and then there are the areas. And the areas only come in on the two more difficult levels of dice. And they require you to group all of a color together as a single area, or as 2 separate areas, or as 4 separate areas. The shape of that doesn't matter at all. Um, but it adds
The
a
obvious
nice.
question is, why not 3?
I didn't have a spare face of a dice. I had enough puzzles by then, and I didn't feel that 3 added anything different. 1 feels quite unique, that you have to put all of that color together in one corner of the board. 4 feels quite unique. You're having to spread it out and make sure there's stuff in between. 2 felt quite unique, that I've got to have 2. I've got to bisect the colors and make sure that I don't know, I put them in the top
Whereas
and
at the
bottom.
point where it's 3, it's
3
like, why
3
not
doesn't
just go to
feel.
4?
Yeah, exactly. 3 doesn't feel very different from 2 or 4, and it was very easy to drop it. And there was no spare side of a dice by that point. I was happy with the shapes that I had, the patterns that I had, and so yeah, that's where it settled.
But just to bring it back to the game design, the shapes that you see on the top are the ones that you will be playing for the basic game if you choose to stick
Yes.
with that. You'll still
Yes.
get an interesting, enjoyable game.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. And that's been one of the fascinating things about both playing it myself and seeing other people play it, that even at the basic level, the game offers some significant challenge. The one that always intrigues me are the shapes U4 and Wiggle4, where a substantial proportion of players cannot instantly place that pattern that onto the board. It takes them 10, 20, 30 seconds sometimes to work out how to use, because they both require a minimum of 2 tiles to be used. And it's a puzzle in itself of how do you place those 2 tiles on the board to create that shape. Once you've seen it, and once you've seen that there are actually multiple ways of doing it, and once you've seen that there are ways of doing it that use 2 tiles and 3 tiles and indeed 4 tiles, it starts wiring up your brain in a new way, in a different way. And by the time you feel ready to proceed on to the black dice, the dastardly dice, the basic puzzles really do seem quite basic in a way that they weren't. And again, once you step up to using the devilish dice, of which there's only 1, again, you look back at the dastardly puzzles that really tripped you up, and you become skillful, and it's a tremendously satisfying feeling of becoming skillful. And you could argue you're becoming skillful at something totally meaningless.
Indeed.
But I
That's games for
dispute
you.
that. Exactly. I dispute that. I think what you're actually learning is you're improving your pattern recognition and your rotation
I
of
would
shapes in your
suggest that what
mind.
you're actually learning is kind of how to learn. And it's like, let's say I go rock climbing, and that's going to potentially practice my grip in my hands and my arm strength, even though the act of doing the rock climbing isn't something that's going to be something that I do in general life. But when it comes to moving some boxes around, or it's going to help me, and it's going to keep me fit. It's going to keep my body in a better condition. And I don't think anyone would dispute that. In the same way, if you do practice, I mean, maybe some people might object to me calling rock climbing totally meaningless, but I don't think that's too controversial. And in the same way, like games, they are completely meaningless, but by their nature of having to react quickly, to be creative, to be thoughtful, to work out how to fit things together, I think that sorry, Alex says shocking words from
seeing
Bez
the
there.
chat, yeah.
But it's just keeping your brain in peak form.
Yeah, I agree entirely. The rock climbing analogy is a lovely one. You're learning to put your body into slightly awkward and unusual shapes that you won't use every day, but there will be occasions when you do, when you're moving house and you're lifting boxes and so on. And the same with this. This is putting your brain into unusual shapes that you won't need to use when you're wandering around the supermarket picking things off the shelf. But just once in a while, you'll come across a problem, possibly a game design problem. And because you've been exercising your brain to rotate things and look at them in different ways, it'll make you a better problem solver generally.
And I think it's been really, really nice hearing in a high level pseudocode, not even pseudocode, because that would require something a little bit more tangible and written down,
Yes.
but an overview of how you might go about programming something like this. And even though I don't want to code ever again if I can avoid it, it would it's really nice understanding these things. And so thank you for sharing this with us. Is there anything that you'd like to say about the topic of brute forcing, about finding solutions for puzzles, that you would like to say before we finish up?
The final thing I was going to suggest, I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I'm just going to share the code editor just to scroll people through, just to show them roughly what the program looked like. I'm not going to talk about the code at all. It'll just give you an idea of the length of it and the complexity of it. So let's see if I can find, where are we? Genius Gems Cells.
Well,
so there we go.
Ooh.
So yeah, this is Visual Studio Code and freebie from Microsoft, and this is Python, and you can see that we've got. This is a relatively short script, I'm sure, for many people, but this was the longest program I'd written in a while.
766
lines of code,
but with some blank lines in there.
Yeah. And yes, occasional commented out things. But the main bulk of it, we've got sort of like this section here. That is sort of like the core loop of iterating over the puzzle stack, and what I was talking about earlier about how you take the next step in solving the puzzle, and then you feed that back into itself until you've done the next step, and then you feed that back, and you get this recursive system going on where you're just nibbling away until you get to the end solution. That's the heart of it. And then we have a bunch of functions up here where it's doing all the sort of checking whether things are valid, and how do you rotate a tri-hex and all that kind of thing. But I won't go into it any more than that. It was just if people were curious to see roughly how big the program was, what it looked like.
Well, that is genuinely very interesting, and thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to move that over to the side for a moment, and let's finish up, or start finishing up, by saying, over to you. What are you up to? You can share, but only if you actually know. I've got the question of the day. Of the day. Let's ask a quick question before you go on our way. Do you have a question for everyone, Rob? If you don't, that's okay. Just how comfortable are you with programming would be my question to everyone. And if you've got a question for everyone, Rob, you go ahead as well. If you don't, that's okay.
My question would be, for those who are programmers, it can be a very solitary activity. How do you look after yourself when you're programming? I was doing this largely on my own, although I have a regular design partner in Adam Porter. He is not a coder by any stretch of the imagination. I'm sure he'd agree with me. I couldn't bounce things off him in the way that I usually would with this. So yeah, it felt a bit lonely and a bit high pressure at times, because I knew I had to get this to work.
It was all resting on you to get this done.
Yeah.
No one else could do it.
So yeah, that would be my question for the programmers.
So 2 questions. Do you program? How comfortable are you with programming? And if you are a programmer, how do you take care of yourself? How do you avoid the dangers of social isolation? I would say that to respond to those questions myself, because I like for us to respond first, I did do some programming. I did do ActionScript 1, technically, not even 2 or 3. And even when 3 was available, I was always ActionScript 1. I think I did go to ActionScript 2 at some point when I really had to, because the earlier one became obsolete. But I kept using Flash MX as long as I could. I did do a bit on the Rosie. I went to university for computer game design technology, I think it was called, at Aberdeen. and it was meant to be half design, half programming, but the programming for me was just a way to make it happen. And I'd
Mm.
done programming before. I'd done a wee bit on the TI-83, the graphics calculator. I made a actual. It's a very bad, not a copy. It's a very bad kind of like Zelda free, but much simplified. You've got like 5 rooms, and then you go around. There's people who chase you, fall down cracks, go into lower floors, grab treasures, go out, and there's like grid coordinates where you move around, and sometimes you find someone who gives
Mm.
you a conversation, and you need to go through that and say the right things. And I was really proud of it. Like people, all my classmates who had a TI-83 said, "Oh, this is really fun," and someone random in a video game shop said, "Oh, wow, this is cool. It's got AI." Where it was just kind of it was a random number of whether it followed you or not, and people attribute personality to these things. I loved that, but I loved it because the programming was a way to get people to play the game.
Mm.
And so when it was a Yarose thing, when it was Flash, I was always making a game. I was learning things for the purpose of making a game. But when it came time to do, okay, now you need to learn how to do pointers. And pointers are super essential if you want to be a programmer. But as a person who's only programming for the purpose of making a prototype of their own thing, you don't need it. And so it was around that time that I got incredibly actually depressed, I think,
Yeah.
for the first time in my life. And I was sleeping about 20 hours a day. And
Mm.
so, yeah, during that time, I think that my way of interacting with other people was constantly making things that other people would want to interact with and putting them up on the internet or
Yeah.
showing them to the other people in the lab and saying, "Hey, I made this thing, come and play it." And that was my thing. Even since I've always wanted to facilitate fun. So sorry if I went on a bit too long, but that is my
No,
response.
it's very interesting to hear. Certainly, a lot of it sounds familiar to me. I've struggled with depression in my life, and programming has exacerbated that definitely. Um,
That's not good.
and also trying to combat that by looking for recognition from people. Oh, I made a thing. Look at the thing. Look at the thing. Which again is not a healthy coping strategy. And thankfully, as I've got older and put a lot of work into mental health, I think I now have significantly better systems. But I also do a lot less programming, which is great. I don't want to be a programmer, like you're saying. I program as a means to an end. So just looking at some of the questions in the chat, I did cybernetics and control engineering at university. A large part of that was programming in order to learn to write AI and
So
other more
making
straightforward.
puzzles, you were calling upon a pre-existing skill.
Yes, although it was something I hadn't done. I last programmed seriously. I wrote databases and database translation software in my 20s, and by my mid-20s was so depressed and burnt out with it that I walked away from programming. In my 30s, I did some web design and so some light JavaScript and a little bit of Perl
Wow.
here and there and things like that. But I hadn't done serious programming. I'm now in my mid-40s. And I hadn't done serious programming for well over a decade, probably more like 15 years. So the first decision was actually, what am I going to program in? Because some of the languages I used to use, I mean, I did Modular 2 at university. Well, who's even heard of Modular 2 these days, let alone used Modular 2? And I was gobsmacked when I, a few years back, discovered Python and used it for some simple scripting tasks, at just how readable it was and how powerful the libraries were. They're incredible libraries maintained by passionate people that can just do wonderful things for you and save you thousands of lines of
And
code.
even if you don't have someone close to you that can read it, there's going to be someone on the internet, and
Yeah.
presumably you can interact with them on forums and
Yes,
things.
indeed. I think it was Alex was saying in the chat, yes, spent half my time on Stack Overflow. Yes, that's very familiar. I mean, what did we do before Google and Stack Overflow? I mean, I remember the answer when I was doing C++ at university. I had a book, which was like phone directory thick. And if the answer wasn't in there, and it would often take you several hours to deduce that the answer wasn't in there, that was it. I was out of options. I had nowhere else to look.
Google is an amazing thing, and back in the day, I mean, you still find some books for artists where it says, yes, an essential part is having books of reference photos. Whereas nowadays, I want to draw a bunch of turnips. I mean, to be honest, there's not as many pictures on the internet. If you look for beetroots with leaves, I didn't find enough good pictures. I found barely a set, but you know, how many am I going to find in a book, realistically speaking? I still found like a good 6-8 pictures, which was fewer than I was looking for, but it was enough to let me make up slight variations so I could expand that to 16 unique pictures of beetroots with leaves on. Maybe I could write a program to draw beetroots. Yeah, I think there's some bits that are maybe more interesting with the human hand. I like to believe that people still like my artistic energy. Hal says, partner and I both program, so we're fortunate to be able to explain problems to each other. That does sound like, I mean, that's the ideal, isn't it? Whether you're a game designer or a programmer or a writer, having other people who do that same thing as you. And when it's board game design, maybe you are working on 2-minute board games. I know that sounds very niche because, you know, there's not many that I can think of that are literally 2 minutes. But if you are in a world where everyone else is working on these 60-minute board games, then you're still going to potentially feel a little bit isolated, but less so than if no one was making board games at all in your neighborhood. But the ideal is that you have some people who are making board games, some people who are interested to try it and are just willing, some people who are just supportive, friends and family, but also a couple of people at least who are like, yes, I know exactly what you're trying to do. I understand the difficulty of making a game that lasts 2 minutes maximum, where, yeah, it's a hard time. Yes, So Alex did say to read out the full thing. I don't code very often, so I spend half the coding time on Stack Overflow and half the coding time procrastinating. For non-coders, should we know what Stack Overflow is?
Yeah, Stack Overflow is a website where people can post questions. There's some fairly strict rules about how you word questions to make sure they really are questions, and then people answer them. And again, there's strict rules as to what an answer is. It can't be an opinion. It has to be a factual, or it's supposed to be a factual answer. And you can then upvote various people's answers. So the theory is that the best practice and the really smart ways of coding things bubble to the top.
Oh,
and
it's the name of a forum. I was assuming this was like the error message.
It's named after an error message. Why it's named after it, I don't know. But yes, it's an internet forum essentially.
Couple of final questions from the audience. Firstly, will you be brute forcing more games in the future? And related to that, do you think it will be easier for you to do so?
Yes, would be my answer to both of those, assuming I work on some more puzzle games. And indeed, I hinted at last time that I am working on another puzzle game at the moment, a very different type of puzzle game. It's going to be one where each puzzle is set out in a book. I hope a sort of narrative book. And you're then going to solve that puzzle with the components you have in front of you, and you'll then turn the page to check your solution. So in that case, I want there to be one perfect solution. There can be other more long-winded solutions, but I'm looking for one perfect solution. And that's going to have to be programmed. And again, I imagine a similar sort of brute forcing type thing. To look for solutions that I've missed. I can't imagine brute forcing. Personally, can't imagine brute forcing any of my sort of more Euro game designs. I'd rather test those with people because that's more akin to how they're going to be experienced. So makes more sense to me. It's more fun, and I just think it's too big a task for my level of skill.
That makes sense. And Hal asks if you ever profiled the script to see what was taking time. I assume that's what it means.
Yes.
Hal is curious to see if there was one part of it that was much more time consuming than the others.
I didn't. It's, of course, the sensible thing to do. And I think, picking up from your question that I didn't answer, Bears, will I be better at it next time? Yes, I'm sure I will be better at it next time. As much as anything, I'll have programmed more recently, so that bit of my brain will have been exercised. There isn't this 15-year gap.
I mean, presumably you'll be able to reuse a good chunk of the code, or not really?
I don't know. I didn't write it with that in mind. I was not trying to write a generic puzzle solver. I was trying to write something very specific to Genius Gems. I think the new game is too different. It involves moving pieces rather than stationary placed pieces, just as one example of the difference. Yes, I absolutely. I keep kidding myself that one day when I've got a spare day, afternoon, week, I'll go back to this program and I'll run the profiler on it, and I'll find a few more early outs where I can fail more quickly, and I'll improve the graphical output. It can output an image of what the board looks like, but it's made up of text characters essentially, nicely laid out. It looks like the board, and they're coloured and so on. But it would be nice if it could output a PNG or something like that showed me what the solution looked like.
I mean, the cost is clear. I mean, the time, the energy,
Absolutely, it's
and
never going to
what's
happen.
the benefits?
It's never going to happen. But yes, next time round, particularly if the puzzle were as time consuming to compute as this one, profiling makes total sense. Find out which bit of the program is slow, and then work out, is there anything you can do to speed that up? Are there some
I mean, you
shortcuts?
say that it's only took your computer a day, which, I mean, presumably that's a day of not using your computer,
Pretty much, yeah.
which seems like it's like a short enough time that maybe it doesn't really matter.
It was, yes, it was just on the cusp where I could generally live without the computer and email from my phone instead, and that kind of thing. But equally, it was a bit of a pain that my computer was just churning away the whole time, and improving the performance would definitely have been a good thing to do had I had the stamina skill to do it. But ultimately, I just needed that spreadsheet to send to the publisher and say, there you go, there's the answer.
And so, yes, if anyone watching this after the fact is happy to let us know, we're also interested in, those two questions. How do you program? What's your level of familiarity or comfort with programming? And how do you avoid social isolation? Because it is something generally. And now to finish up, over to you. What are you up to? You can share personally if you want to. I was thinking about taking a day off. I feel like I'm feeling a wee bit run down, to be honest. Like I'm just feeling like normally Mondays are my day off, but instead I was like meeting up, kind of teaching games, and then coming back and doing the interview, which it was fun. It was like really fun, but I just feel like and then I didn't get to sleep until like 3 o'clock or something, and so I honestly feel like I might sleep, and I'm considering just not going. For those who have watched previous shows, the publisher who owed me £1,000 did pay me, so I do now have the money to go to Bastion in Wales if I want. But given that I'm feeling a little bit run down and possibly coldy, I'm feeling like I maybe shouldn't go. But yeah, I'm just going to take it easy. I'm just going to chill. I'm probably going to watch cartoons, read a book, sleep. That's pretty much me. I might invite someone over for half an hour who live like for an hour. They live half an hour walk away, and see if they fancy coming over to play a quick light game. We'll see what happens. What are you up to, Rob? What's really up to everyone?
I also had a terrible night's sleep. Maybe it was the moon or the
Oh.
wind, or I don't know, something like that. But yeah, I was definitely awake at 4, having tried to go to bed early, and then the dog needed letting out at 7. So it's all been pretty disrupted. So yeah, an afternoon off sounds lovely, and I think the rest of the household is going out, so I'll have the place to myself. It'll be quiet. I can do whatever I want or nothing. It sounds brilliant.
Um, Josie says, I've never programmed, although I have thought it's something I want to understand and learn. And I would say that programming, having gone through that process, it does definitely push your brain into thinking logically, which is good. But it can also be a real pain when you're trying to work out what the problem is, and then you realize that one time you basically, when you name your variables, it's case sensitive. So one time I named it with a lowercase f, one time I named it with a capital F, and I'd been searching for that for a day, and it's like eventually I worked it out. I think that now I just want to drill into everyone, unless it's changed. I assume it's still the same in most modern programming languages. That case actually matters. So make sure that your case is consistent. And if you're capitalizing the first letter of each word, or whether you're using underscores or whatever you're doing, that's really annoying. Hello, Runa. It is lovely to see you. Who says, I studied IT, so I know some programming, but I found out I am okay with the graphical user interface, but I seriously can't deal with the stuff behind it. So I went another route. And Jess, I'm not sure what you mean telling who to leave after half an hour. We are finishing. The person that I was inviting. Oh no. I'll tell them come over. Like half an hour feels a bit harsh because it takes them half an hour to get here. So I'd say, come over for literally an hour, and I'd say, hey, do you want to come over for literally an hour? Yeah. Finch says, as it's oh my gosh, it's the 22nd of February.
Yeah.
We should do something special. At 222, it's the 22nd of the second month of the 22nd year in the year that starts with 2000. I mean, it'll be 200 years until it gets even more twos in there. But I'm meeting my friend for coffee and a walk at 222.
10 p.m. will get you another 2 in there. 22 this evening.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, nice.
But I love this idea. This sounds fun.
Yes, and I think you should definitely have a little private walk at 10:22. I think that's something that I might actually be plan. How tired I am. If I can sleep, I am going to sleep. I'm honestly feeling like I might eat something because I've not had breakfast yet, but I might go to bed pretty soon. This sounds terrible, but I'm calling today my day off officially. Alex says at 22, so 22 seconds after 10:22, I should do something too.
Yeah. Something that lasts 22 seconds would be ideal.
Yeah. Like, are there any songs that last 22 seconds? I know songs that last like 6 seconds or 11 seconds, but is there a way to search that? Google, what song lasts 22 seconds? That's something I'll leave up to the viewer to do. At this point, I'm going to recap and wrap up before we finish up. So we had a lovely chat, and Rob Fisher came over and we talked about the process of brute forcing things. We talked about why it's a brilliant thing. Well, actually, first we talked about recent highlights and recent events, about what we'd been up to, and just a couple of playings of games. We briefly mentioned a couple of things that we're working on, and Rob talked about a 3-letter word puzzle, sticking that together, how you would write a code from a high-level point of view, and then putting that into the logic of how Rob actually wrote the code for Ingenious Gems. And then we actually saw a wee bit of the code at the end. and we decided that the brilliant thing about it is that brute forcing in this manner, although it's never entirely brute forcing, there's always some early checking, some early pruning, so you never go all the way to the end of the solution. There is still some intelligence in there, but it's just a way to, hey, computers can think more quickly than us. Let them do most of the work. That's basically what it comes down to. If you want, is there anything else that we talked about that we really want to? Yeah, we touched upon the loneliness of coding, which is really interesting. Like, I think that is definitely a thing where coding by its nature and also drawing and artwork are solitary activities. And I honestly find back in the day, I think around 2005, 2002 to 2006, maybe, I was drawing a daily comic. So every day I did a short comic, and it started off with like quick 2-panel things, and they were hastily drawn, and then it evolved, and so it became like works of art. And sometimes it was a comic that was what you would imagine a comic to be, and sometimes it was a very expressive art piece, but it was something that was like, yeah, this is something that I painted today. But I always uploaded them. I felt rewarded because uploading them, sharing them with other people, saying, hey, look at the thing that I made. And drawing nowadays, I'm not comparing it, I am comparing it to coding, let's be honest. I know it's very different, but yes, there are similarities where with that, I draw a thing, and then part of the thing that keeps me going is during the drawing process, I put it on Instagram or Twitter when I'm feeling a lack of energy, and then people say, oh, good work. And I feel, hey, that makes me encouraged to keep going. But with coding, you can't do that because until you're actually finished, it doesn't do anything at all, right? And so it's like, there's no one there to congratulate you. So that's got to be a lot harder. And so, yeah, lucky Hal and Ruth, I won't say, but for finding each other. Yeah. But any other things that we talked about that you wanted re-mention, or any other things you want to say finally?
I don't think so. Thank you very much for the conversation. Really delightful.
It has been lovely. Oh, I didn't put your links into the YouTube description. I do apologize. If you can write your links in the private chat, I will put them up.
Can do.
In the thing. If you want to check me out, I am Stuff by Bez everywhere. Stuffbybez.com. Check out stuffbybez.bigcartel.com, twitter.com/stuffbybez, instagram.com/stuffbybez, where I post pictures sometimes, twitch.tv/stuffbybez. I stream every day at 10 a.m. UK time, same as youtube.com/stuffbybez. If you want to join my Discord, it's stuffbybez.com/discord. And of course, I really want you all to go to my Kickstarter and please please follow, because the more people that follow, it doesn't cost you anything right now. And when the Kickstarter launches, you will get all the games, like it will be high quality print and play for only £1. I want to make all my busy bargain bags like a no-brainer, that if you're not backing this at £1, then why not? And I will make it available later, but it'll be like more, maybe triple the price. So it'll still be fairly cheap, but it's why not back it for £1? And not only are you getting it cheaper, but also you're helping me, because by backing it on day one, then you're helping the Kickstarter algorithms. That is that. Runa wishes to say something. Runa wishes to say, have a great day. Thank you, Runa. That is lovely. And Rob, that is your Twitter that you've got there?
Yes.
So, where do you like to be found?
Twitter is an easy place to get me. I don't do a huge amount of social media stuff. I just can't get my head around it. And busy with dogs, busy with family, busy with life, busy with
You're a busy
renovating.
person.
But yes, if you want to find me, you will.
I feel like we've had a lovely crowd, and Idol Michael is doing stuff, and so let's go over. If obviously there's never any obligation, but if you want to join the raid, then please copy paste the raid message, And we're going to say hello to our friend of the show who's been on a few times and also inspired. No, yeah, they did inspire my own game jam, which then produced a game about wee whimsical creatures and tried to identify them after some makes noises. And so that was really good of them. Check out stuffbybez.com/dreams. Tomorrow I'm having Alan Paul on. And even though I've put Sebastian for like 3 days, booked that off so I don't have any guests, because if I were there, I just want to do a very quick show. I might just, I might be there, I might not. But sure, spread the word. Thank you, everyone, and lots of love. And the only thing left to say is bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye bye, bye bye. This is the end of the show. Bye bye, bye bye. And now it's time to go to bye bye, bye bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye bye, bye bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye bye, bye bye. This is the end of the show. Bye bye, bye bye. And now it's time to go. Bye bye, everyone. Bye bye, Alex.
Cheerio.
Bye bye, Rob. And now we will raid.